If you're planning to make a move to an East Coast city and are debating between Philly and Washington, D.C., then this video is for you. Today, we're going to compare Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, and home to our world-renowned cheesesteaks and the Philadelphia Eagles against Washington, D.C., our nation's capital and home to some of this country's most prized and iconic landmarks. So who's going to come out on top? Stay tuned to find out more. Hey everyone, this is Chris Fuhrman and this is my channel, Living in Center City, Philadelphia. Welcome. And if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. Now, if this is your first time to the channel and you want to learn more about what it's like to live and enjoy Center City, Philly, make sure to tap that subscribe button below, click that notification bell right next to it so you're notified each and every time we put out a brand new video. And we actually get a lot of folks that are reaching out to us relocating to the city, trying to figure it all out. They're asking questions about the market, particular neighborhoods, what's going on, even to the street level, particular condo buildings, and we love helping everyone out. So if you have any questions, if you're thinking about making a move, just reach out, send us a quick email, contact info below, and we'd love to help you on your journey. All right, let's dive in. The first topic we're gonna compare here is entertainment, nightlife, and culture. And real quick, and it's probably obvious here, but I am biased and I live in Philly and sell real estate here. So take this with a grain of salt. I'm just some guy on YouTube. That being said, I'm going to try to be unbiased here. And while this is a very broad and lumped together category that we're comparing with entertainment, culture, etc., there's a lot to break down here when comparing the nightlife of two major cities. So we're going to do a kind of a 10,000 foot view here as opposed to the granular nitty-gritty detail. Both cities undeniably have thriving nightlife and entertainment scenes, lots to do in their own respects. Each has bustling bars, packed entertainment venues, shows, performances, museums, and everything in between. Undoubtedly, if you're looking to go to a bar or have dinner, you're gonna have a diverse range, obviously, in both places. However, I think the differentiating factor here truly comes down to culture. Philly is a city with tons of pride. People are constantly walking up and down the streets wearing Philly apparel, and the city has a unique atmosphere and unique grit to it that I think few, if any, cities across America can replicate. Now, Philly's food scene also is much better here than DC, in my opinion, and many people's on Reddit's. There's a ton of BYOBs in Philly and just more diversity here. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, when it comes to sports, between the Eagles, the Flyers, Phillies, 76ers, really there's an immense sense of pride and loyalty here. If it's game day, just walk down Broad Street or walk in the city, people all over are going to be sometimes going nuts and crazy. We got a bad reputation sometimes for our fans here, but we're just committed, we're intense, we're loyal. Even Rocky, just having such a cultural icon and statue in the heart of the city shows the love that our residents have for it. And you can really feel that walking down the streets every day. Come on down to an Eagles game yourself one Sunday and just experience it. See if it's for you. It's really an atmosphere, a vibe that is truly unique to Philadelphia. DC, on the other hand, simply can't compete, in my opinion, when it comes to culture. Obviously, there's lots of things to do, like the historical landmarks and things like that, but many people residing in the Washington area are transplants. People not originally from that area, it's more transient. And with it obviously being our nation's capital, there's obviously a massive political presence that attracts people from all over the world, and that's gonna have a different vibe than what we have here in Philly, where a lot of people have grown up here. Philly certainly has a lot of transplants as well, but it's got a significantly different culture and a significantly different vibe than DC, and I think for the better. Now, all that being said, naturally it's going to come down to personal preference, but for this particular category, I'm going to give Philly the win. All right, next up, we're going to talk about population and population density. The population of Philly is somewhere around 2 times the size of DC, with Philly being around 1.6 million people and DC coming around 700,000 according to the US Census Bureau. Now, this can be a positive or can be negative, really depending on what you're looking for. However, one major factor that you have to consider here when looking at population is the size of each city. Philly is significantly larger, covering just over 141 square miles compared to DC, which is about 68. In the metro area. Now, when calculated out, Philly has about 8% higher population density than DC per square mile. Now, while Philly is by no means packed, it's nothing like New York City. If you've been there, feel like a sardine, that's not how you'd be in Philly, but it's significantly more than DC is gonna be. So if that's the vibe you want, then Philly might be a good fit for you. If you wanna live, I don't know, where there's no one around, or maybe kind of more like in a suburb, then DC might be a better option for you. While this doesn't directly correlate, something worth mentioning that relates to population is a study from Wallet Hub that surveyed the worst cities for driving. The results had Philly at 96, pretty bad, and DC at dead last, 100. So if your mind went directly to traffic, you're gonna have about the same in either place. That being said, Philly is the most walkable city in America. So you don't even necessarily need a car here, and you don't necessarily have to deal with traffic. Whereas in DC, depending on where you're at, you're probably gonna need either a car or take public transit. With this and population density in mind, the population category really depends on what you're looking for in a city. While I don't think there are any definitive numbers to say one is drastically better or worse than the other, I'm gonna call it a tie on this one, and again, really up to personal preference. All right, let's talk about economic opportunities here. There's quite a bit of a contrast when it comes to these two cities, and your best fit in this category is also gonna depend on you, really depend on your industry, not necessarily your preferences, but the industry that you're working in. Obviously, if you're into politics, there's no debate that you're gonna find more opportunities, mobility, and status in DC, our nation's capital, obviously in the center of political life in America, arguably the world. Many residents in DC work in politics or in complementary industries to that to operate the political arena here. So if that describes you or your job description, DC may be a better option for you. However, if you're maybe in the medical field or medical research or academia, Philly could likely have more opportunities for you here. Philly has a ton of, obviously, colleges, Penn, Drexel, Temple, and others where there's a lot of academic jobs, but there's also a massive amount of medical research and the medical field here. So could be a better option for you if you're in that industry. Both cities are going to have corporate opportunities as well, but generally speaking, these are the major institutions of both major cities. Now, if you're in the tech industry, DC is arguably a better place to be. There's just more tech jobs there, especially with Amazon's second headquarters opening up just outside of DC. However, Philly's tech sector isn't to be ignored necessarily. It's been growing over the last decade, and I think there's opportunity here, but there is potentially even more opportunity in Philly for that to develop. So if you're in tech, it's not a bad place to consider and to look to see if you can get a high-paying job, especially when you compare the cost of living. So since this category is so reliant on your profession, of course, let's chalk this one up to a tie as well. However, if you had to press me to pick one, I would say that DC overall is better because it's just got a greater amount of high-paying jobs. Though, obviously, you still have to factor in the cost of living in DC being much higher. Speaking of the cost of living, let's talk about that next with affordability. But real quick, if you found this video helpful thus far, it would mean the world to me if you wouldn't mind clicking that like button below so that YouTube knows I'm putting out some helpful content. All right, let's talk about affordability. Obviously, the economics here, it's what your job is, right? How high paying it is, but also the affordability of the city and kind of balancing that. CNBC did a survey of what salaries needed to live comfortably in the top American cities. And they concluded that to live comfortably in Philly, you would need just over $61,000, while in DC, you would need over $76,000. So approximately a $15,000 difference here. And what this demonstrates is that the cost of living in DC is obviously going to be higher than Philly. Another interesting article, salary.com, backs this up, estimating the cost of living here in Philly is cheaper than DC by about 27%. And another article by NerdWallet goes even farther to estimate the cost of living difference might actually be 41% higher in DC than Philly. It's a bit of a different spread, so somewhere between 20 to 40% higher. And all this was based on 2023 data found at the time of the recording of this video, so obviously this can fluctuate and go up and down over time. And regarding home prices, the story is really, of course, just the same here. The median home price in Philly was somewhere around $240,000, whereas DC is somewhere around so a little bit under $600,000, somewhere around like $580,000, $585,000, $590,000, somewhere around there, depending on the data you look at. I looked at Realtor.com's data. that I pulled in February of 2024. So again, this can obviously fluctuate, but it's a big contrast. DC is certainly nothing like New York City, but it's clear that DC is much more expensive than Philadelphia in basically every way that you can compare. So Philly, I think, is a clear winner here in the affordability comparison. Another important consideration here is the location of Philly or DC in respect to other major cities. Philly, by a long shot, is more centrally located than DC in relation to other East Coast cities. For example, Philly is about an hour drive from Atlantic City or the Jersey Shore, about an hour and a half to Newark, or maybe an hour on Amtrak. And if you're going to New York City from Philly, it's about a 2-hour drive, or just over an hour on Amtrak, about 3 hours from Philly to New Haven, and about 5 to drive up to Boston. Now, if you want to calculate all of this from DC instead of Philly, basically just add 2 to 3 hours to the distance. So how is this all relevant? Well, I think it opens up a ton of job and entertainment opportunities for you if you live in Philly. At any point, you can take a quick trip to New York City and catch a show, or take a day trip down the shore. Or if you have to commute into the city, New York City that is, from Philly, or go to Newark, you can absolutely do that while still living here in Philly. Whereas that's kind of impractical if you're in DC. So I think Philly's location gives you far more flexibility than you would have from DC. Not to mention, if you enjoy skiing in the winter or hiking in the summer, you're gonna be closer to the mountains around the Philly area than you would be in DC. So we're gonna have to give this one to Philadelphia. All right, next up is public transportation. DC, I think, is the clear winner here. We can just say that right off the bat. While Philly's SEPTA, which is the public transit system, is fairly easy to navigate compared to, let's say, New York City, as well as convenient for getting around, it's nothing compared to DC's metro system. Between its openness, its bright lighting, cleanliness, DC is regularly ranked among the top 3 systems in the entire US. It's extremely convenient, efficient for connecting people downtown to many neighborhoods and tourist spots, and it's also very user-friendly. Whereas SEPTA in Philly really has a long way to go to compete, and hopefully our new mayor can accomplish some of her goals with SEPTA with improving the transit system. But all that being said, at this point in time, DC is the clear winner here with public transportation. Before we go to our last category, I just want to say, as much as we love making these videos, we love helping people relocate to the Philly area even more. So if you're even remotely considering moving here in the next few months or even the next few years, it's never too early to start getting actionable information. So send us a quick email, our information is below, and we'll keep you updated about what's going on in Center City, Philly. All right, lastly, we're gonna take a peek at the quality of life and stress of the population between the two cities, Philly and DC. Now, while this is not something that we can measure exactly, the personal level of stress, it's typical that finances and financial stress put pressures on people. Simply making ends meet and making sure all the bills are paid is one of the biggest sources of stress for Americans. And a study by the American Psychological Association found that 72% of Americans stress about money during any given month. So with that in mind, we can safely assume that a higher cost of living area like DC, which, like we went over earlier, 20 to 40% higher potentially depending on the data you look at, is significant. Now, I don't believe it's presumptuous to imagine DC residents feel a greater degree of stress presently in their life than here in Philadelphia. Just again, because of that cost of living, and I think a little bit also because of the atmosphere and the vibe that's in DC. And while there's of course plenty of factors that play into stress levels like your personal profession, your relationships, finances often play a primary role. So in light of this, I'm going to give the stress and quality of life category to Philadelphia for the win here. Now I suppose this is obvious, but before you make a move to a major city, I would of course recommend that you visit before. If I can help you in any way with any questions that you have about Philadelphia, the market, particular condo buildings, neighborhoods, really anything at all, just shoot me an email. All of my info is below. I would love to help you out. And if you're curious to learn more about the best neighborhoods in Philadelphia, click on this video right here to explore some of the awesome neighborhoods in Center City, Philadelphia.